On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 66, created on December 26th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, and Neil in a basement in Green Bay. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hello, everyone. I am enjoying a week in Wisconsin. I'm going with a Wisconsin-themed beer from Badger State Brewing, a Musky Citra IPA.
Good evening, gentlemen. My beverage tonight is Arabolita Barrel-Aged Stout.
And despite the unseasonably warm Christmas weather, I made a beverage called a Jack Frost Colada. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. And just the audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. Our topics: it was week 16 and Christmas in Carolina. We have a very special anniversary to talk about, and we will be looking ahead to week 17 and a Viking New Year. Plus, it is the return of the GBC Theatre. I'm excited for that, but let's talk about the game first. Packers over the Panthers, 33-30 in Carolina. A Christmas miracle, a Festivus miracle. Jeff, what happened?
Way too damn close.
Let's start out with the most positive development in that game, however, which was the return of Aaron Jones being showtime. And that first drive just being dominated by Aaron Jones running down the field. Overall, in the first quarter, Aaron Jones had 9 rushes for 82 yards in one quarter of football. He ended up the game with 127 rushing yards. This is the Aaron Jones that we thought we were going to have all year. When we have that Aaron Jones on offense, it makes everything much easier.
It took just 3 plays to get 1/4 of the way to a 100-yard game. And through those first 3 plays, you're watching this, and yes, the cynical side of you is saying, okay, when do we abandon the run? Does this mean Aaron Jones doesn't touch the ball again until the third quarter? What's going to happen? When's the other shoe going to drop? But I think the offense maintained a nice, well-balanced attack, and we kept Jones in the game. And I think Jordan Love had a good day passing the ball as well, Neil.
Just to follow up on that balance, yes, we ended up with 29 passing plays to 34 running plays. So it was not only balanced, it was a slight balance toward the run. Now, I think that maybe we should have gone a little bit more passing in that second half, but it was a good game overall for Jordan Love. 17 of 28, 219 yards, 7.8 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, a QBR of 90.1, 109.1 traditional quarterback rating. As Jordan Love has done over the last few weeks of the season, it was the number of drives that he continued with his passing ability and the number of third down conversions or plays where Jordan Love just made a play, the receivers made a play. There was a connection between the quarterback and the receivers, despite the fact that we had our top 2.5 receivers out essentially as far as the game was concerned, with Wicks missing the entire second half. Jordan Love still made it happen, whether it's Bo Melton, the person who's got to be making the yards. Obviously, Dobbs had a huge game. Tucker Kraft, another big game, even though he seems to not love his testicles very much. It was just a great game overall. And I think if you just look at the first quarter statistics, that gives you a handle of how much our offense was moving. At the end of the first quarter, it was 7-3, although one play into the second quarter, it was 13-3. In the first quarter, the Packers had 11 first downs, only 2 for Carolina. But despite the fact that we had 11 first downs, we were only 1 of 1 on third downs. That is 10 of our 11 first downs were on first or second down. 152 yards of offense for the Packers in the first quarter to only 33 yards of offense for Carolina in that first quarter.
And Tucker was involved yet again. Mr. Kraft.
If Tucker's not going to love his testicles, Jeff will love them for him.
Yes, at some point, the guy just hurdling is not in probably his best interest or his testicles' best interest. But you know what? That's how he plays, and that's how he's going to play. And he had some big catches. And I was most impressed with the guy named Bo Melton. Bo knows catches, right? Or I'm like, who is this guy? So, one catch before coming into this game. Okay, who is this guy? 2022 7th round pick by Seattle. And the fact that he's, catching 4 passes on 6 targets, good for him. Not ideal. I would like to see Watson and others in there. I think this just goes to what Jordan Love is able to do. He doesn't have premier experienced receivers. He's got who he's got. And what he's doing is still pretty amazing.
The other thing we should say is that our defense actually played well in that first quarter. Smith and Quay with a sack, 3 quarterback hits, and Bryce Young in that first quarter was only 2 of 7 for 39 yards plus that sack. So 2 completions on 8 dropbacks, and their rushing game was 3 rushes for 1 yard in that first quarter. Going back to Love, 4 of 4 for 60 yards in the first quarter. Everything was looking exactly the way it should against the worst team in the NFL. We scored the first play of the second quarter. Everything's going to continue in that direction, right?
Well, yes, in theory it should, Neil. Yes. that's the question of what happened, right? We are expecting halftime adjustments, and we'll get to the second half here and just talk about how dismal that production, everything kind of rolls off the end of the table there at halftime. And that's one of the big questions of what's going on with this team. You're right about the players that were in there. You talked about Bo Melton. He's wearing number 80. This kid's 5'11", 189. When you see a player wearing number 80, that's not the body structure you expect. And I want a tall, skinny kid out there who's, going to leap and catch the ball. He's still a great leaper, had great hops out there catching the ball. But this goes to the axiom that a great quarterback will make your receivers better. We've seen Malik Heath and Dontavian Wicks improve during the season as receivers, notably Tucker Kraft, as you mentioned, and now Bo Melton just comes in and he's catching balls that are thrown to him because he has a quarterback who's throwing a decent ball. He is keeping plays alive. What'd you say, Neil? 2 sacks on the game? Or was it 1 sack and 2 hits? Either way, Jordan Love is extending the play. He's doing what you expect an experienced quarterback to do, to use his feet, to make things happen, to find the open receiver. And I think we're seeing the offense do what we want it to do. Yes, we've had the growing pains, but the offense is doing things correctly.
And just continuing with Bo Melton, 4 receptions for 44 yards in the first half. Second quarter, Dontavian Wicks, 2 receptions, 29 yards, and that really incredible touchdown, that connection between Love and Wicks that we had. We scored on our first 4 possessions of the game, going up to a 23-10 lead late in the second quarter. And overall in the first half, 19 first downs for the Packers in the first half, 251 total yards of offense for the Packers in the first half, with Jordan Love 12 of 19 for 134 yards and a touchdown in the first half. Everything was rolling for that offense in the first half.
And we finally saw almost a perfect first half. I mean, the defense did play well. The offense played, like you said, almost flawlessly. And so you're thinking, okay, other than the missed extra point, that was not ideal. But nonetheless, it was a really good first half of football. But again, this is sort of what we were expecting, right? I mean, this is Carolina, a 2-win team. They're not going anywhere. They've got a rookie quarterback. This is how you would expect a team like the Packers going hopefully to the playoffs, or at least playing for the playoffs, to respond.
Unfortunately, in that second quarter, we saw glimpses of what the second half was going to be like, and our defense was certainly not as stout in Q2 as it was in quarter 1. Carolina actually outgained us in the second quarter, 121 to 99 yards, and they also had 6 first downs in that second quarter. But I think the most disturbing part was on their touchdown drive in the first half, where they had a 19-yard pass, the 13-yard pass, and then that horrible 20-yard end around to score the touchdown. That brings it to a 13-10 game. And then on their next drive, their first 2 plays were 11-yard pass and 18-yard pass. They had 5 consecutive plays that were first downs between those 2 drives. And that really is what we had been concerned about as far as this game is concerned.
I think the big thing, Neil, overall in the game, we talk about the first half. First half is spectacular, and it's the expectation of making adjustments at halftime. Because Carolina, remember, they are still a professional football team. They have not given up on Bryce Young, and he is going to be something special in this league. So you know that the Panthers are going to teach this kid, hey, this is what the defense is giving you. Let's do this in the second half. Our defense has to be ready to make those adjustments as well in the second half, but the offense as well. Here's what's been working. Let's expand on this. We come out in the second half. We've got the ball, which is great. Oh, good. We get the ball to start the second half, despite whatever we care about Jair Alexander trying to botch the call on the coin flip. We've got the ball at the second half, and they shit the bed right away. I mean, it's the first drive is terrible. 3 out of 4 of the first drives are terrible. The second drive, I know, Neil, you're going to tell me, but John, the second drive was really good. But it's just the fact that they come out so darn flat on offense. And then the defense, you just look at and you're like, oh, here we go again.
Just going to that first drive, right? I mean, it was a sack actually that derailed it. Jordan Love was only sacked one time, but it was a fairly critical time to start that second half. It was on a 2nd and 5. So, did we need to be going back so far on that drop back that Love took the 12-yard sack? I don't know about that, but even on the drive that we scored. So as John said, 3 of our first 4 drives of the second half were 3 and outs. On the one drive we scored, we started out well with the 25-yard pass with Dobbs. And then this has been a criticism of the Matt LaFleur offense and the Matt LaFleur play calling that has really sharpened in my mind as we just sort of see what's going on. Matt LaFleur likes to do the same types of plays over and over. And in that second drive, after this really big pass to Dobbs, run for Dillon, Jones, Dillon, 6 straight running plays before, and that ended the third quarter before finally we scored the touchdown at the first play of the fourth quarter to Dobbs. But that consistency of doing the same player multiple plays in a row is something that we see all the time. And I just have to assume the defenses have picked up on this trend that LaFleur has, and they have a feeling of what might be coming once they see Jones once, or once they see a pass once, that there's just too much of this repetition in the overall theme of what they're doing with the play calling. It's like, forget about the run, and then you remember I got to do a lot of running plays, and you got to mix it up a little bit better than that.
And I would think that that is all on LaFleur, because Jordan Love has demonstrated that he can run more complexities in the plays. So I'm guessing that that's just coming from him. Now, what I did like, though, Neil, about the play calling is there wasn't one of these freaking jet sweeps.
Melton did have one in the first quarter.
Okay, one, but it wasn't, to your point of repetition, there weren't half a dozen of them this game. So that's progress.
That's progress. But in the third quarter, there were only 2 passes by Jordan Love. Love was 1 of 2 for 25 yards in the play that I mentioned, whereas we had 8 running plays for 33 yards in the third quarter. And again, that's yes, it's good that we're getting a running game going, but I think that Jordan Love has shown that he's got the ability to make plays on third down or do it on first down, that we've got ability to put a drive together, not just by one phase of the game or not just by the other phase of the game. We can actually use them interchangeably. And that lack of using them interchangeably, I think, hurt us as far as not being able to move the ball as effectively as we otherwise might.
In addition to that, it's sort of the mentality of, keeping your foot on the gas or whatever you want to call it. Suddenly, okay, we've got a decent sized lead. And it's like, okay, we're just going to, kind of plod along here, ball control, based on a number of factors, one being a really shitty defense, or one that can't seem to hold, certainly in the second half after adjustments were made. That's where really the problems are starting to really become a big issue, is that they're not scoring a lot of points in the second half, and they're just trying to control the ball. Well, if they're not able to do that, if there's a couple 3 and outs, then suddenly it's back to the defense. And then we all saw what happened.
Right. Carolina gets that third quarter touchdown. They missed the extra point. So, right, in exchange of asshats for asshats, it's 23-16. Green Bay is on the move again. The first play, right, of the fourth quarter, you get a touchdown. It's 30-16, 3 seconds into the fourth quarter. So you have 14:57 remaining in the game, but it feels like eggshells. It's like the least comfortable 14-point lead you can ever imagine having. Why?
John, that's a great question. And I think that Joe Barry did get comfortable, although I don't think he adjusts his play calling in any way, shape, or form. But Carolina didn't actually dominate us in that third quarter, despite outscoring us 6-0. They only had 57 yards of offense. They had no passing first downs in that third quarter. All of their first downs were either by penalty or by rushing. It wasn't a case where they were dominating us. They had their one long drive, and that was a mostly rushing drive. But on that first drive that Carolina had in the fourth quarter, their first plays to Thielen, and then we stopped them. We get the ball back. So it's a 2-touchdown lead. We've got the ball back, and unfortunately, another 3 and out. Carolina gets the ball then, and then they did the touchdown drive that made it a 1-score game, a touchdown drive that was driven by a lot of passes, 15, 13, 16, and then we had a failed challenge just to add some entertainment value to that drive, followed by an 11-yard passing touchdown that makes it an 8-point game.
Yeah, whoever's in LaFleur's ear on challenges, he's been terrible this year. He needs to get fired as well.
That was an awful challenge. And again, costing him another timeout, potentially valuable timeout, especially if they have to drive at the end of the game.
And after Green Bay 3 and outs again on their next drive, Carolina immediately brings it with a touchdown drive that included the 2-point conversion, a bunch of long passes, and then just throwing a run for the 2-point conversion. And oh shit, now it's 4:05 left in the game, and it's a tie ball game when we had been ahead by 2 scores not that long ago.
Having a tie at some point in the game, not a big deal. Tied at 30 with 4 minutes to go, that's a big deal because this is a team, the Panthers have not scored this many points, even with their 2 wins, never led in regulation in the fourth quarter. Their 2 wins came last second, and it's like, shit, are they going to get a last second win here now because we're tied? What's Green Bay going to do with this last 4 minutes?
Thankfully, we decided to at least throw the ball downfield a little bit. 2 key passes, 36-yard pass to Dobbs on 3rd down, a 20-yard pass to Kraft, where once again he put his nuts in the field of play. But thankfully, we got down to Carolina territory. And I think there's where there might be a question with the Joe Barry defense. Was it the right call once you got down to easy makeable field goal range? First of all, do you trust your kicker to make it? And secondly, they did nothing once they were down to the Carolina 13. It was just 3 simple runs. Let's try to get the clock down as low as possible. And normally that would be defensible, but that normal means you've got a defense other than Joe Barry's defense.
Which we saw. I mean, so yes, we celebrate the field goal. You know, as I'm watching with you, Neil, I made the comment, you know, they got to make the fucking field goal. And they did. Fortunately, because there was, you know, some consternation there, but no, the field goal was true. So here we are, 3-point lead, and you're thinking, okay, they've got a rookie quarterback. There's 19 seconds left. Oh, we should be good here, right?
Thankfully, they didn't have another timeout. That's all I have to say, because they easily could have made that field goal with those 19 seconds if they had a timeout or maybe a team that was a little bit faster in getting to the line of scrimmage. But 2 22-yard passing plays to get into field goal range. They did it in 19 seconds. They actually did it in about 17, but didn't have the timeout in order to give them the chance of the field goal. 1 more second, though, that game's going to overtime, and all bets are off at that point, given the way our defense had been playing.
But again, though, Eddie Pinheiro would have had to have hit the field goal, right? He's missed 2 extra points so far. He's not clutch. But the point being that the Panthers could have gotten into position in 20 seconds to have a chance to continue the game into overtime. That's the factor here that you're just looking at and you're saying why. The frustration has been killing us this year.
And just looking at some of the numbers for Carolina in that fourth quarter, they had 12 first downs in the fourth quarter. They had 183 yards total in the fourth quarter. They had 170 passing yards in the fourth quarter alone. 18 overall first downs in the second half for Carolina. Basically, everything that could go wrong did go wrong as far as their defense was concerned. And thankfully, the defense was spotted with enough of a lead and a small enough amount of time that it worked out in the end. But it was amazing. Going back, when I said the first quarter stats, it was 11 first downs to 2 in the first quarter. The final numbers were 25 to Green Bay to 26 for Carolina. They had more first downs than we did. We had a 119-yard advantage in yards in the first quarter for the game. They had a 25-yard advantage, 394 to our 369. And Bryce Young, 298 net yards passing, over 300 yards if you exclude the sacks. It's just an unacceptable performance in the second half by our defense.
Now, if this is a guy named Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or somebody that has proven that they can move the team down the field quickly, this is a rookie quarterback who has done nothing this year, who's had a typical rookie season on a really bad team. So the fact that he completed 2 laser passes, each of 22 yards, and put them in a position to potentially tie the game, it just boggles your mind. But then there's this. 5 quarterbacks have had their best Pro Football Focus grades of the season against Joe Barry's defense. Yeah, the guy we've just been talking about, Bryce Young, who's a rookie, Baker Mayfield last week. Then, of course, we've got Danny DeVito. Now benched Danny DeVito. So Barry's got the trifecta going. And then before that, okay, respectable Kirk Cousins and Justin Herbert. Wow.
Just continuing to pile on that, Bryce Young had not gone over 200 yards since October. He hadn't thrown a touchdown pass since the middle of November, and his career high passing prior to the game against Joe Barry's defense was 247 yards passing. Again, he finished with 312 yards passing, so going way beyond his prior career high. And he had only had one prior game with more than one passing touchdown. He only had 9 passing touchdowns on the season going into the game, gets 2 passing touchdowns in the second half of that game. Going to advanced statistics, he only had 3 prior games with a QBR of greater than 50. He was 78.1 against the Packers. He only had 3 prior games with a traditional quarterback rating of greater than 90. He was 110.0 against the Packers. And again, the QBR for the season for Bryce Young, 34.7, traditional passer rating 75, blows those year-long numbers out of the water. As far as the Panthers team is concerned, they had only had 4 touchdowns total in their prior 5 games. They had 4 touchdowns against the Packers in one game. And the defense obviously made mistakes on all phases of the game, mostly game planning, but specifically as far as game planning is concerned, we blitzed a lot in that game. We had 10 quarterback hits, which is good, but we only managed 2 sacks. Bryce Young's last 10 games as far as numbers of quarterback sacks, 4, 6, 4, 3, 7, 4, 4, 4, 3, 2. Fewest sacks against Bryce Young in any of his last 10 games, including 6 sack and 7 sack games. We're not doing it as far as coverage. We're also not doing it as far as rushing the passer is concerned. A couple of big plays, but not that level of consistency that you need from that pass rush.
The other thing that I noticed, I was looking at the leading tacklers. I know we talked about this a little bit last game, how safeties and cornerbacks constituted the vast majority of the leading tacklers. Same thing this game, but there seemed to be an even bigger chasm here. Safety Anthony Johnson Jr. had 8 tackles for the Packers. Isaiah McDuffie also had 8 tackles as a linebacker. After that, Keyshawn Nixon, cornerback, had 7. Jonathan Owens had 7. Then cornerback Eric Stokes had 5. And then we got a linebacker in here again, Quay Walker with 5. Jair Alexander had 4 tackles. And then it wasn't until we get down to Devontae Wyatt, who had 3 tackles, does a defensive lineman even enter the picture here. Now, the other thing that came up, how they were rotating the defensive linemen, but they weren't substituting the cornerbacks or the safeties really at all. And they're playing the almost entire game, if not the entire game, plus a whole bunch of special team snaps. This is like the second or third week in a row now where there's primarily the leading tacklers. So they've got to be just exhausted out there playing all these snaps and not rotating in.
The least impressive part of that game from Matt LaFleur's perspective, I think, was his response in the post-game press conference, where he basically threw the offense under the bus for not allowing the defense to get any rest in the second half. And while there is a element of truth in that, you can't blame your offense when you're scoring 33 points in the game. But the lack of rotation as far as the D-backs was concerned is something that certainly is adding to the total amount of tiredness and the total amount of fatigue on that team. So Jonathan Owens, Jair Alexander, and Anthony Johnson all had 66 snaps. So that's 100% of the defensive snaps. And then, oh, by the way, Jonathan Owens also had 14 special team snaps. And even you go to Stokes and to Nixon, they both played almost all of the snaps on defense, and Nixon also played 14 special team snaps, whereas we have guys who've started in recent weeks, such as Rudy Ford. Rudy Ford had 7 snaps, Carrington Valentine had 3 snaps, and Corey Ballantyne had 0 snaps on defense. If you're playing with a defense that is fatigued, maybe you should rotate some of those guys in. I don't think the guys that would have been rotated in are any worse than most of the players that have been playing. And guess what? I think that the players are going to play better if they are fatigued, as Matt LaFleur is insinuating, and they're not getting any chance to rest because the Carolina offense keeps running down the field. I just don't understand the lack of situational play and the lack of recognition of what these players are able and not able to do and where they need to have some sort of help. We've got 3 D-backs who had started in recent weeks who basically didn't play at all in that game. The other thing related to that is we essentially played 5 D-backs straight the entire game. And I don't know, maybe try to switch things up. Let's throw some dime coverage in there at some point. It just seems like we played the exact same formation, no matter what the situation is. It's a third down and goal at the 2-yard line while we're going to play 5 D-backs.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just no matter what the situation is, there seems to be no variation within what the play personnel is that is on the field. And this is obviously going to hurt you in situational defense. And this absence of any awareness of situational defense is arguably the most frustrating element of the Joe Barry defense.
You're right, Neil. And we've been talking about all season. Defense is the most frustrating part of this team. And when you go down the road into the future and you look back at scores, you look back at records, for some reason, it's always the offense that gets remembered. It's how did that quarterback play? We're at a point now where the Green Bay Packers this season are 7-8. This is a 7-win team in Jordan Love's first year as a starter. We can do the comparisons to 2008. That Packers team, they were 5-5. At one point, they went on a 5-game losing streak. It took till the last game of the season to win that 6th game. Aaron Rodgers only won 6 games in his first season as the full-time starter. Jordan Love has passed that, and we know this offense is playing well. The offense in this game played well. They have had some spectacular games. We've seen Love grow into this position, and the offense is definitely where we want them to be. But damn, that defense needs to come around.
Just look at what our reactions were after the game. More or less universally, it was a reaction of frustration rather than of jubilation that we won. We are moving ourselves forward. We're now in an excellent position going into Vikings week, where if we can win out, we are almost certainly going to make the playoffs. And yet that was not what anyone was focused on. It was that frustration of this collapse of the defense in the fourth quarter. We had a fabulous game by Jordan Love. Our offense put up 33 points in that game. John, you said this. This is a game that should have been a signature Jordan Love game where he has no wide receivers. He has nobody to throw to, and yet he still comes through and has a huge game added by the heroics of Aaron Jones now coming fully back. That's not at all what the discussion was, despite those things being absolutely true.
There were no turnovers in this game. So not only did the defense not force any turnovers, the offense didn't get a short field. They didn't get the benefit of a turnover. So let's talk about positives. Like you said, offensive line. Wow. Rasheed Walker. And here's another player who has really, really grown and gotten better as the season has gone on. Love only got hit a couple times, 1 sack. I mean, the fact that you've got a rookie QB back there, for all intents and purposes, that's basically untouched most of the game is pretty remarkable, considering Bakhtiari hasn't played all year. So the fact that they've sort of plugged and played, and that has actually worked really, really well.
I might add that they've also been doing rotation. So this is the first game that Rasheed Walker played the whole game, but Josh Nijman had been playing well enough that he was considered for this rotation until Rasheed Walker just took over. But Sean Ryan and John Runyon split the right guard duties, essentially 50-50. And I don't know why it's perfectly fine to mix and match as far as the offense is concerned, but for some reason we've got to just play one player the entire game of the defense, and we're just going to switch who that player is who plays the whole game. That makes no sense to me as far as the defense when the offense is doing it successfully. You weren't noticing who the Packers had on their offensive line if they were rotating people out. And this has been true for the last few weeks. It's been really pleasant to not worry about our offensive line.
But the strength of the offensive line also improves those quarterback numbers, right, Neil?
It does. And Jordan Love has just been really on a tear since week 9. By most statistical measures, he's now one of the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the NFL over that time frame. And again, it's over that time frame. That's a caveat. Quarterback is judged over the whole season. But since week 9, Jordan Love is 1,866 yards passing. That's second in the NFL in that time frame. 15 touchdowns, third. Only 2 interceptions, tied for 6th. An 83.7 PFF grade. That's 6th. A 101.9 passer rating. That's 5th in the NFL in games played since week 9. And in the last 6 weeks, the Packers offense by DVOA is 4th in the NFL at plus 18.7%. And this is the problem, is our defense is 30th in the NFL over that same time frame at plus 22.7%. That is, our defense is hurting us more than our offense is helping us. Our offense is helping us at the level of the 4th best offense in the NFL. And the defense is doing worse than that as far as the movement is concerned. And then putting Jordan Love.
That is an understatement, Neil.
Fire Joe Barry. At any rate, some other numbers, historic numbers, as far as Jordan Love now taking into account the entire season. In NFL history, in quarterbacks with their first 16 starts, The number of quarterbacks who've had 28 or more touchdown passes, less than 12 interceptions, adjusted yards per attempt of greater than 6.9, Patrick Mahomes, Dan Marino, Justin Herbert, Nick Foles, Chad Pennington, and now Jordan Love.
Wow.
Not many quarterbacks in their first 16 starts have done what Jordan Love is doing. And during the game, we were all commenting on this, that one of the things that's amazing to watch about Love is he's always looking downfield. Even when he's scrambling out, he's always trying to make a play with his arm, and he will run when he needs to, and he's effective. He had one really huge run in this game. But you take the touchdown to Wicks, for example. I mean, this was a case where, yes, he needed to be able to move, but it was because he was always thinking downfield. That's really impressive. And this sense of where he is on the field, the sense of where the defenders are on the field, is also reflected in the fact that Jordan Love only has 29 sacks on this year. He's basically in the same ballpark as everyone except for Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes within that top tier of quarterbacks. I mean, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the season, just at that first day of training camp, is that he showed a composure, he showed an awareness, he showed just a general calm and leadership. And that thing that he exuded on that first day of training camp, he has gotten better and better at that as the year has gone by. It's been a joy to watch. And he has been one of the best quarterbacks in football over the last 6-8 weeks. It's beautiful.
Once again, a victory 33-30 puts the Packers to 7-8 on the season. 2 games left to play. We'll talk about one of them in a moment. And December 26th, as an anniversary, a very special day in not only the history of the Green Bay Packers, but the history of Lambeau Field, Jeff.
That's right. Today, December 26th, marks the 30th anniversary of the first famed Lambeau Leap. This was a play against the Raiders, the Oakland Raiders. It was a bitterly cold day after Christmas. It was the Packer defense just really getting started in 1993 with their free agent signing a guy by the name of Reggie White. He was instrumental in this play in that he had the interception as he was being hauled out of bounds, ladled it back to Leroy Butler, who just kept going. And it was a cold, icy, snowy day. And once he got through the end zone, he just kind of kept going. And at the time, the stands, it wasn't quite of a leap as it is today. He just kept going right into the stands, and thus was born the Lambeau Leap.
And despite what anyone else says or what photographs you have, Reggie White did not step out of bounds before he threw the ball to Leroy Butler. But it's one of those things where I think there's stories that have been going around that the players talked about it. You know, defensive guys, they don't get to score much, but when they have a big play, they want to have a celebration. Terrell Buckley has taken credit for the concept of doing the Lambeau Leap. You know, we joked that Chester Markle was flying so high as it was. He probably should have invented it at that time. But it's Leroy Butler who gets credited on this date for doing the first one ever. But Jeff, we already talked about this on a past episode, didn't we?
We did, going back to episode 10. Yes, kind of the Reggie White's greatest hits as well, and the importance of his free agent signing. But again, he was instrumental in this, in that he was breaking up basically a screen pass, and he intercepted the ball, and off he went until he was getting tackled, hauled out of bounds. And Leroy Butler, the Butler did it. Right place, right time. And like I said, and history was born.
And again, that episode 10 is available on YouTube. You can go ahead and find it out there if you want to revisit our talk about the invention of the Lambeau Leap. One final note on week 16 as we transition into week 17 here, Jeff. It was a game in Minnesota. The Vikings down the stretch here, they got the Lions at home, now the Packers at home. And for teams that are hovering in the 7-8, the Packers really in the driver's seat. They win 2. They're doing pretty well. But the Vikings seem to be falling apart. They lose to the Lions. They don't really control their own destiny. What is the mood in Minnesota?
The mood in Minnesota basically is go Timberwolves. Because for whatever reason this year, the Timberwolves are historically good. The Vikings...
And Minnesota fans are historically front runners, so...
Yes.
Yep, indeed. That is a true statement, Neil. So, no, I mean, once, Kirk Cousins was having a fantastic season until he got hurt at Lambeau. And so, this is a team in transition, right? They had pretty high expectations. They performed really well last year, until they got to the playoffs. And this year, they've kind of been, come back to earth, if you will. They're not winning all the close games. They haven't been terrible. But one thing they have had to contend with this year that they really didn't last year is really bad injuries or catastrophic injuries to really key players. So Justin Jefferson was on IR. He's back, but this last game just against Detroit was very costly, where they lost TJ Hawkinson, who was having a fantastic year. Their tight end number one. He went out with torn ACL and MCL ligaments, so obviously he's not playing. And then linebacker DJ Wanham, who was a thorn in the Packers side when they played earlier this year. He left with a torn quadriceps. He had 2 sacks against the Packers at Lambeau, and so he's out as well. Hawkinson had a huge game against the Packers earlier this year, so there's 2 key players out. And oh, by the way, Kirk Cousins isn't starting either. He's out for the season. So now you've got sort of the Vikings carousel, right? You've got quarterbacks. Nick Mullins started against Detroit. He had 411 yards. But he also had 4 picks. A starter has not been named for the Vikings yet. So we could play, let's make a deal. Behind door number 1, we have Nick Mullins. Behind door number 2, we've got Jaron Hall, who he did the mop-up duty at Lambeau. He was 3 of 4 for 23 yards, and he's thrown for a total of 101 yards this season. Or door number 3, Josh Dobbs, who was traded here to the Vikings midseason. He was the savior, and then he wasn't. And he got pulled, benched during the Vegas game in which 3 total points were scored. So we don't know who's going to start against the Packers this weekend. We do know that it is the national game, New Year's Eve, here in Minneapolis. So, Neil, I think you've got a few other statistics here as well.
First of all, I have the question is Joe Barry capable of game planning against 3 separate quarterbacks who play 3 completely different games? I don't think he can game plan against one quarterback. So this seems like maybe way beyond his intellectual power. Yeah. So just a couple of numbers on the season. The Vikings are 10th overall in yards per game on offense, but they are 3rd in yards per game in the passing game at 257 passing yards per game. But on the other hand, they are 27th in running yards per game at only 93 running yards per game. The defense of the Vikings is all pretty much middle of the pack in yards per game, pass rush, whatever. One big difference between the Packers and the Vikings, the Packers on the season are at 0 net turnovers, tied for 15th. The Vikings are at -9 net turnovers on the season. That puts them in 30th place. And they're doing it on both sides. So the Packers have 16 giveaways and 16 takeaways. The Vikings have 21 takeaways, so they're doing better than the Packers at 17th, but they're 30th in giveaways in the NFL. Now, the numbers by DVOA look a little bit different for these 2 teams. The Vikings offense is actually 21st in the NFL by DVOA, which takes into account situational play, but their defense is actually 5th in the NFL by DVOA. So the yards per game doesn't actually match up with what advanced metrics say. That they say that the Vikings defense is actually what we need to be most afraid of, although that doesn't take into account that we have Joe Barry as our defensive coordinator. Still, fire Joe Barry. But one other area where we are better than the Vikings is that the Vikings special teams is ranked 30th in the NFL by DVOA. So, these are 2 teams that have flaws. I think your summary was perfectly correct in that they both have flaws. I want to go to a couple of other statistics on the Packers in this season. So the Packers defense, again, by yards is fairly middling other than against the run. But if you go based on first downs allowed by the Packers, we're actually 28th in the NFL. I think that sort of fits the mindset the Packers fans have. And in defense, in third down percentage allowed, we're 27th in the NFL. The Vikings are better than us in both of those categories as far as defense is concerned, but the advanced metrics are also kinder to the Packers as far as our offense is concerned. So by the offensive numbers on the season, we're basically completely middle of the pack. Take the offense and the number of times the Packers have been sacked. We've only been sacked 29 times in the season. That's 5th in the NFL. As far as rushing TDs, we only have 9, so that's 22nd. But the Vikings are actually worse than us in offensive rushing touchdowns in the season. They only have 7. They are 1 touchdown ahead of the New York Jets. One other statistic where we look really good is on third down conversions. The Packers offense converts at 44.7% on the season. That's 6th in the NFL. That sort of fits the eye test that Jordan Love is making a lot of third down plays. And this is coming through now, even on the entire season numbers. I'd say the only other element as far as statistics are concerned is talking about the asshats and extra point percentage. And with that last game against Carolina, the Packers moved to 31st in extra point percentage at 87.9%. But that's actually sort of a lie because Carolina's 32nd. They just haven't scored enough touchdowns. We are the only team in the NFL with 4 missed extra points on the season. Let's not miss any extra points against the Vikings. It's in a dome. It's going to be a loud crowd. But let's have this offense play the best that they possibly can play, and let's hope that our defense does enough. And the one thing that we need to do more of is takeaways. We only have 6 interceptions on the season. That's 31st. San Francisco leads with 19. And we need to do something different to try to force those turnovers that Minnesota is so good at giving the ball away. That's really the question. If we can force turnovers, I think we've got a decent chance in this game. If they go and play without a turnover, we don't have a single takeaway. I think that we're kind of in really rough shape.
And there's a saying, Neil, that if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And Joe Barry will look at you and say, I can plan a soft zone against any quarterback.
And will, John, and will. Now, the good news is the Vikings can't really run the ball. So against Detroit, they attempted to run 11 times. They had 17 yards on those 11 rushes. Now, when the Packers and the Vikings played in week 8, the leading rusher for the Vikings was Alexander Madison. He had 16 carries for 31 yards. Against Detroit, he had 2 carries for -1. So kind of a regression there. What's going to happen? Because the Packers run defense is not fabulous, and the Vikings can't run the ball, as Neil pointed out on all metrics, as well as just numbers, right? They don't have a stud running back. They've got quarterbacks by committee. We don't know who's going to start, what we're going to get. I'm confident, as we've talked about, in our offense. They're continuing to learn. They're in a dome, so it's a little bit faster surface. So I think our offense will be just fine. It's going to be loud, but I don't think, it was loud in Detroit Thanksgiving Day as well. And look what happened. I'm not concerned about that. Again, the concern goes back to the defense. The no-name quarterback or the quarterback by committee and no rushing game. Is Joe Barry going to foster another NFC Offensive Player of the Week?
As you said, Jeff, still a primetime game. It's Sunday night in Minneapolis. You didn't want to do New Year's Eve in Minneapolis. This could have been a great night for us to get together there. That's fine. We'll all hang out and do our own respective things. But we have a big Sunday night matchup to look forward to. And now, inspired by characters from Saturday Night Live, this is another performance of the GBC Theatre. You know my cousin, Bill Swirsky, the super fan.
Bears fan.
Yeah, he's a Bears fan, but he's family, so we still talk to him.
Not in the season.
No, not during football season, unless it's Bears week and he's at the game.
So if you see Billy, tell him to be at Lambeau Field in January.
Okay, that's good advice. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jimmy Swirsky. I'm from Trivers. Along with me today, my cousin Kenny Swirsky from Green Bay, and my other cousin, Nick Swirsky. He's from up north.
Rib Lake.
Yeah, but they don't know where that is, and we don't want them to know where that is.
No fuckers from Illinois.
That's right. They can have Door County, but we don't want them spoiling any of our beautiful North Woods.
Don't get me started on them in Door County.
Yeah, Kenny had a bad situation on Highway 42.
A bad situation indeed, but that's a tale for another time. Tonight, we have a tale for you that is as old as Christmas itself.
Christmas Carol.
This is the tale of Joe Barry on Christmas night, as he was visited by the ghosts of defenses past. The ghosts appeared during the night of Christmas Eve as visions of the Carolina Panthers needing 20 seconds on the clock when they only got 19, still danced in the head of Joe Barry.
These visions kept him up all night.
It affected me too.
And while trying to close his eyes to escape the demons of a football game earlier that day, Joe Barry was visited by the ghosts of Buckets Goldenberg, Ray Nitschke, and Reggie White.
It was the ghost of Buckets Goldenberg who said to Joe, I invented the draw play by blitzing Sid Luckman so much that he had no choice but to run the ball. Put more blitzes in your defense, Joe.
The ghost of Ray Nitschke growled, Joe, your linebackers want to chew up quarterbacks and spit them out. Stop putting them in pass coverage in the slot.
And the ghost of Reggie White pleaded with Joe Barry. You have amazing strength and speed in your front seven. Put them in the box and crush everything that's in front of the box.
The ghost growled, grr, and gave Joe Barry visions of glory for the final 2 games of the season if he would just stop playing a soft zone.
The ghost reminded Joe Barry that his contract will end, and if there is no Christmas miracle of him getting fired, that he may as well go out with a bang in his last 2 games in Green Bay.
Now, as anyone who has actually read the classic A Christmas Carol can tell you, there were 4 ghosts that made a visit that night. Soon, the ghost of Fritz Schirmer would appear before Joe Barry. Fritz would recite his famous line that if you can't get to the quarterback with 4, send 5. And if you can't get there with 5, send 6. And if you can't get there with 6, send 7. And if you can't get there with 7, send 8. And Joe, don't worry about sending 8, as your pass coverage can't get any worse.
Debatable.
As morning twilight would enter into Joe Barry's sleeping chamber, the ghosts would slowly fade away, but not before they could be heard to say,
Tell Bisaccia that we're coming for him next.
And this concludes another performance of the GBC Theatre. Before we go, Nick, the fellas usually do a Packers player of the past to celebrate the past glory of great players and what they meant to the Green Bay Packers. Nick, help them out with episode 66. Who is your Packer player of the past?
Nitschke.
Thanks for joining us. All right. That concludes the GBC Theatre. You guys, what are your final thoughts for this week?
Having lived in Minnesota now for most of my adult life, the Vikings-Packers game here in the Twin Cities are always interesting. Never quite sure what to expect, and this year is no different. We've got a Packers team coming in. Both teams are fighting for their playoff lives. I'm really hoping the moment is not too big for Jordan Love, again, that they can recreate some of that magic that they had in the Dome on Thanksgiving. But who knows with this defense? What defense is going to show up? I'm really confident, excited, and happy about the progression that our offense has made this year. I just have no idea how Joe Barry still has a job at this point, and whether that's going to play a factor, whether it's going to be our ass hats. I'm hoping for a win, but honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen come Sunday night on national TV.
Jordan Love has had a really strong first season as a starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. And that first season as starting quarterback is so strong that it ranks among the very best quarterbacking seasons for any quarterback in Chicago Bears history. So the all-time record for most passing yards for the Bears was Eric Kramer in 1995 with 38 yards. Eric Kramer also holds the franchise record for most touchdown passes in a season with 29. Beyond that 29, Jay Cutler had 28 touchdown passes in 2014, and Sid Luckman had 28 touchdown passes in 1943. With 3,587 yards in the season, Jordan Love is only 251 yards away from that record. And with 27 touchdown passes, he's only 2 touchdowns away from tying the touchdowns record. But there's a difference. Jordan Love is also running the ball in addition to passing the ball. And he has 246 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns on the season. Those combined 30 touchdowns passing and rushing for a quarterback already ties the Bears franchise record for touchdowns in a season by a quarterback. Eric Kramer, 30 in 1995. Jay Cutler, 30 combined in 2014. Sid Luckman next at 29 combined rushing and passing touchdowns in 1943. By the way, Justin Fields only had 25 combined touchdowns last year, so he's well beyond Justin Fields. And in total passing and rushing yards for a quarterback in a season, Jordan Love is already at 3,833 total yards. That now only puts him a mere 49 yards behind the total number of quarterback yards for Eric Kramer in that season. He's already tied the best season of any Bears quarterback ever. He's got 2 more games to go, one more if we're going to compare equal 16-game seasons. But Jordan Love in his first year as Packers quarterback is as good as any Bears quarterback has ever been, and possibly even better. Go Pack, go.
And if I could inspire the staff and the players for this game, I would bring in a 5th ghost, the ghost of Al Davis, to say, just win, baby. All right, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. And on Facebook, we are the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Nitschke.